3 weeks before my scheduled craniotomy to remove a brain tumor, I sat in the pre-surgical consultation room at Metropolitan General Hospital with my parents. The neurosurgeon had just finished explaining the risks. Potential paralysis, speech complications, memory loss, and a 5% chance I might not wake up at all. "So when can we schedule this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Dr. Martinez checked his calendar. "Given the tumor's growth rate, I'd recommend we operate within the month. The sooner, the better." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Isn't this a bit rushed? I mean, how serious can it really be?" "Mrs. Chen, your daughter has a meningioma pressing against critical brain tissue. Without surgical intervention." "But people get headaches all the time," Dad interrupted. "She's always been dramatic about her health. Remember when she thought she had appendicitis and it was just gas?" I felt the familiar burn of embarrassment creep up my neck. "Dad, that was when I was 12. "The pattern's still there, sweetie," Mom said, patting my arm condescendingly. "You've always made mountains out of molehills." Dr. Martinez's professional smile tightened. "I can assure you this is not a minor issue. The imaging clearly shows." "Doctors love to make things sound scarier than they are," Dad said with a dismissive wave. "Keeps the money flowing, right?" I scheduled the surgery for the following Tuesday and drove my parents back to their house in silence. As I pulled into their driveway, Mom turned to me with that familiar look of maternal concern that somehow always felt more like judgment. "Honey, we've been talking and we really think you should get a second opinion. Maybe even a third. This whole brain surgery thing just seems so extreme." "The tumor showed up on 3 separate MRIs, Mom. But you seem fine," Dad added. "You're working, you're functional. Why put yourself through unnecessary surgery?" I wanted to tell them about the daily headaches that felt like ice picks behind my eyes. About how I'd been quietly documenting my increasingly frequent memory lapses and the episodes where words would temporarily disappear from my vocabulary. About the morning I woke up and couldn't remember my own address for 30 terrifying seconds. Instead I said, "The surgery is scheduled. I'll need someone to drive me home afterward." "We'll see," Mom replied. "Your father has that golf tournament and I promised Susan I'd help with her garage sale." "It's brain surgery." "It's minor surgery," Dad corrected. "You said so yourself." I hadn't said that. I'd never said that. The build-up. The week before surgery, I tried calling my parents twice to confirm the pickup arrangements. Both calls went to voicemail. When I finally reached them, Dad sounded annoyed. "Look, sweetheart, we're not doctors. We don't really understand all this medical stuff. Why don't you just take an Uber?" "An Uber? From brain surgery? It's outpatient, right? You'll be fine." It wasn't outpatient. I'd be in the hospital for at least 3 days, possibly longer depending on complications. I'd given them all this information multiple times, but somehow the details never seemed to stick. My brother Michael called that Sunday. "Mom says you're having some minor procedure done this week." "It's not minor, Mike. It's a craniotomy." "Right, but she said it's like getting a tooth pulled or something. Anyway, I can't make it up there. Busy week at work." I realized then that my family had collectively decided my surgery was an inconvenience rather than a medical crisis. The narrative had been set. Sarah was being dramatic again, making a big deal out of nothing, seeking attention through medical theatrics. By Monday evening, I still had no confirmed ride home from the hospital. I called my parents one more time. "We'll try to make it," Mom said. "But honestly, if it's as minor as you keep saying, maybe you should just plan to get yourself home." I sat on my couch that night, the pre-surgical instructions scattered across my coffee table, and felt more alone than I had since my divorce 3 years earlier. The marriage had ended badly, but at least then I'd had family support. Now, facing the scariest medical procedure of my life, I was apparently on my own. What my family didn't know was that I hadn't been entirely alone for the past 8 months. The hidden truth. I'd met Dr. David Kim at a medical conference in Chicago last fall. I was there representing my biotech consulting firm, presenting data analytics solutions for surgical outcomes research. He was there as the newly appointed chief of neurosurgery at Metropolitan General, delivering a keynote on innovative brain tumor removal techniques. We'd struck up a conversation at the hotel bar after his presentation. I'd complimented his surgical methodology, and he'd been impressed by my analytical insights into post-operative recovery patterns. Coffee led to dinner. Dinner led to long conversations about medicine, research, and the intersection of technology and patient care. By Christmas we were inseparable. By Valentine's Day he'd proposed during a quiet dinner at his apartment, presenting a ring while explaining that he'd never met anyone who understood both his work and his passion for saving lives. We'd married in a small ceremony at the courthouse 6 weeks ago. Neither of our families attended. His parents lived in Seoul and I'd simply told mine we were seeing each other casually. The truth was, I'd grown tired of introducing people to my family only to watch them get subjected to subtle dismissals and backhanded comments. David was different though. He was brilliant, accomplished, and completely devoted to his patients. He also had a protective streak a mile wide when it came to people he loved. Which was why, when I told him my family had essentially abandoned me for my surgery, his jaw had tightened in a way I'd never seen before. They what? It's fine, I'd said, curled up against his chest in our bed. I'm used to it. They've always been like this when I have medical issues. Sarah, you're having a craniotomy. This isn't a dental cleaning. I know. But they think I'm being dramatic. David had been quiet for a long moment. Then, what time are your parents supposed to arrive tomorrow? They're not. They said they'd try to make it, but Dad has golf and Mom has a garage sale. The silence that followed was so heavy I could practically hear him thinking. I'll handle this, he'd finally said. I hadn't asked what he meant. Surgery day. The morning of surgery, I checked into Metropolitan General at 6 a.m. The nursing staff was efficient and kind, walking me through preoperative procedures with the sort of gentle professionalism that made me feel genuinely cared for. David had already been at the hospital for 2 hours, reviewing my case files with Dr. Martinez and ensuring every detail was perfect. He'd kissed me goodbye before I was wheeled into pre-op, promising he'd be waiting when I woke up. Dr. Martinez performed the surgery flawlessly. The 4-hour procedure removed the entire tumor with clean margins and no complications. When I emerged from anesthesia around 3 p.m., David was sitting beside my bed in recovery, still wearing his scrubs from his own morning surgeries. How do you feel? He asked, taking my hand carefully. Like someone excavated my skull with a melon baller, I croaked. He laughed, relief evident in his voice. Dr. Martinez says everything went perfectly. Complete removal, no complications. Good. That's good. Your parents called the nurses' station around noon, he said carefully. They wanted to know if you were out yet. But they didn't come. No. They didn't come. I closed my eyes, too tired and medicated to feel the full weight of disappointment. It's fine. No, David said quietly. It's not fine. An hour later, as I was being transferred to my recovery room, the elevator doors opened to reveal my parents and my brother Michael. They looked uncomfortable and slightly annoyed, as if they'd been inconvenienced by having to navigate hospital parking. There she is, Mom said with forced cheer. How are you feeling, honey? Tired, I managed. See? She's fine, Dad said to Michael. Told you this was blown out of proportion. They followed my gurney to the room, chattering about traffic and how confusing the hospital layout was. Michael complained about having to leave work early. Mom mentioned that she'd had to reschedule her hair appointment. So when can you go home? Dad asked as the nurses settled me into bed. Probably Thursday, I said. They want to monitor for complications. Thursday? For minor surgery. Dad looked genuinely shocked. It wasn't minor surgery, I said weakly. Well, it couldn't have been that serious if you're already talking, Mom replied. You always were resilient. That's when I heard David's voice in the hallway, speaking with Dr. Martinez. They were discussing another patient's case, their voices carrying the authority and precision of medical professionals at the top of their field. My family didn't notice. They were too busy deciding among themselves how dramatic I was being about recovery time. It's just minor issues, Dad said dismissively to Michael. She'll probably be back to work next week. Stop being so dramatic about everything, Mom added, straightening my blanket with the sort of aggressive care that felt more like criticism. That's when the door opened and David walked in. The revelation. He was still wearing his surgical scrubs, but now he had his white coat over them, the one with David Kim MD Chief of Neurosurgery, embroidered in blue thread. His ID badge hung prominently, and he carried a tablet displaying what was clearly my post-surgical brain scan. My family fell silent. David's eyes swept the room, taking in my parents' uncomfortable expressions and Michael's confused face. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decision-making. I need to discuss Mrs. Kim's post-operative status with her family. Mrs. Kim. He'd used my married name. Dad's eyebrows shot up. Kim? Her name is Chin. Not anymore, David said calmly. We were married 6 weeks ago. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Now, David continued, his voice taking on the tone I'd heard him use with incompetent residents, I understand there's been some confusion about the severity of this procedure. He moved to the wall-mounted screen and pulled up my brain scan, the images crisp and detailed in black and white. This was a craniotomy to remove a grade 2 meningioma that had grown to 3.2 centimeters, he said, pointing to the images with clinical precision. The tumor was pressing against the temporal lobe, causing increasing intracranial pressure and threatening critical brain functions. My mother's face had gone pale. We didn't realize. Without surgical intervention, this tumor would have continued growing until it caused seizures, permanent brain damage or death, David continued. The procedure involved opening the skull, carefully separating the tumor from healthy brain tissue, and removing it entirely while avoiding damage to surrounding neural pathways. He turned from the screen to face my family directly. This was not minor surgery. This was not an outpatient procedure. This was complex neurosurgery that required 4 hours in the operating room and a multidisciplinary surgical team. Dad cleared his throat. Well, Sarah always. Sarah always what? David's voice had dropped to a dangerously quiet level. She tends to exaggerate medical issues, Dad finished weakly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Let me make sure I understand, David said, his words precise as surgical instruments. Your daughter was diagnosed with a brain tumor, scheduled for craniotomy, and you believed she was exaggerating. We just thought. Mom started. You thought wrong, David cut her off. And because you thought wrong, your daughter faced major surgery without family support. She arranged her own transportation home. She prepared for potential complications alone. Michael looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. We didn't know it was serious. She told you it was serious. Her neurosurgeon told you it was serious. The hospital documentation clearly outlined the risks and recovery requirements. David's voice remained clinically calm, but there was steel underneath. What you chose to do was dismiss her concerns and abandon her during a medical crisis. Tao, wait just a minute, Dad said, some of his bluster returning. We're her family. We know her better than. Do you? David interrupted. Because the woman I married is a respected biotech consultant who has revolutionized surgical outcome analytics. She's published research that's changed how we approach post-operative care. She's brilliant, successful, and one of the strongest people I've ever met. He gestured toward me in the bed. The woman lying here just survived brain surgery with courage and grace, despite being abandoned by the people who should have supported her most. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of my monitors. How did you say you know my daughter? Mom asked weakly. I'm her husband, David said. And I'm also the chief of neurosurgery at this hospital. Dr. Martinez, who performed Sarah's surgery, reports to me. The full weight of the situation was finally sinking in. My family was learning simultaneously that I was married to someone they'd never met and that they'd dismissed the professional judgment of his entire department. Here's what's going to happen, David continued. Sarah will remain in the hospital until I'm satisfied with her recovery. When she's discharged, she'll come home with me where she'll receive proper post-operative care. He looked at each of them in turn. I suggest you take some time to consider how you want to move forward with your relationship with my wife. The aftermath. After my family left, hastily and with mumbled promises to call later, David pulled a chair beside my bed and took my hand. I'm sorry, I said. They're not usually quite that bad. Sarah, they abandoned you during brain surgery. There's no not that bad version of that behavior. I wanted to defend my family. They just don't understand medical stuff. David shook his head. They knew brain surgery was serious. They chose not to believe you. My recovery went smoothly. David checked on me often and the nurses gave me extra care as the chief's wife. My parents called twice, both times awkward. On Thursday, Dr. Martinez cleared me to go home. David came with discharge papers and a wheelchair. As we waited, my phone rang. Michael? Hey Sarah. How are you? Better. Going home today. Good. I'm sorry I didn't understand how serious this was. He went on, praising my work and asking questions about David's position. I realized he wanted to know how powerful my connections were. After I hung up, David said, "Your brother seems interested in your career now." Yeah. Funny how that works. When we got home, flowers waited on the porch with a card from my parents. "Welcome home." "They sent flowers," I said. "They sent guilt," David replied softly. Inside, he made me tea while I got a text from Mom. "Hope you're feeling better. Can we meet your husband soon?" I showed David. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to heal first. Then maybe we'll see if they've changed." "You don't owe them forgiveness," he said gently. "You owe yourself care and respect." 6 months later. The MRI was clear. No tumor, no headaches, and only a faint scar. My family was polite now. They asked about my work, respected David, and avoided dismissing me. Michael even asked for my help on projects. The biggest change was in me. Living with David showed me what real respect looked like. I learned to set boundaries. When Mom told me to tone down my success, I said calmly, "That's not my responsibility." When Dad joked about my dramatic health concerns, David cut in. Sarah's concerns were valid. Dad fell silent. The surgery saved more than my life. It showed me who truly stood by me, and it gave me strength I didn't know I had. The old, dismissed Sarah was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, strong, respected, and loved.